welcome back to Reunited States, the podcast where we aim to bring back civil discourse to our national dialogue. From Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Ehrig.
And from the Cathedral of Notre Dame, I am Jesse Saywell.
I'm just kidding. The echo from last week is gone. I'm from Manchester, New Hampshire. This is Reunited States. Welcome back.
Wow. If I didn't know you were going to do that, I would be laughing quite a lot. I think playing Quasimodo got a bit to your head, didn't it?
Yes, master! You, master!
You are deformed!
I am deformed!
And you are ugly!
And I am ugly!
These are sins from which the world will have no pity!
Oh, God. It's gotta stop. Okay. We're way too out there right now.
Where were we? Politics, that's right. Reunited States. What a week of news we've had. Actually kind of insane. I mean, we have Greg Abbott is calling for the arrest of Texas Democrats. We have Trump with new tariffs on India. We have sex toys being thrown at WNBA players. We have Chuck Schumer singing. And that's not AI. Oh my goodness. There's too many things to talk about. But we're going to pick a few here that are important. And before we get into the main story today, which will be, of course, the story brewing right now in Texas with these redistricting votes being avoided by Democrats fleeing the state, I do want to talk a little bit about these new tariffs that have been imposed by Trump or are being proposed by Trump on India. Trump is proposing a 50% tariff on India, but this is very specifically because India is currently continuing to buy oil from Russia. Trump effectively saying, hey, Modi, if you continue to buy Russian oil, we will hit you with this 50% tariff. Now, we have talked about tariffs in the past and why Trump's specific strategies with these tariffs have been, in oh so many words, a train wreck, a terrible, terrible strategy that has done nothing but hurt the American consumer and the American economy. How he has targeted countries that make no sense whatsoever, and with deals that he wants to be made that make no sense, not even to the country he is, dealing with, and, doing nothing but hurting the economy with these awful tariffs. But I actually want to address these new tariffs differently because I think that this specific strategy with India and with Modi specifically is actually not a bad one. And maybe it's a hot take. Maybe you're going to be like, what do you mean? Are you actually, saying something approving of Trump? Oh, no, I am.
Dun, dun, dun.
No, yes, I'm going to be canceled right away. But no, I think actually, I do think that this is a better strategy than the tariff plans he had earlier in the year. And that is because this is specifically about the relationship that Modi and that India has with Russia and with Putin. And Trump is using these tariffs as a way to drive a wedge into that relationship. Now, there has been so much talk about Trump being in bed with Putin, about all this collusion between Russia and the U.S., and specifically the Trump administration. And yes, those are all things that are very concerning and need to be investigated and have been investigated. But I think that even with all of those controversies brewing, the U.S. is still not an ally of Russia. And Trump doing this is kind of showing that there is at least still some pushback on the Russian state and Putin specifically. Because, newsflash, we don't really like him. We are not fans of what Putin's doing, not in Ukraine, not anywhere else. And that needs to
Most
stop.
of us.
Well, us on the podcast, at least.
Tucker Carlson, maybe not.
Well, no, he definitely is. I wouldn't be surprised if he's there right now, saying, "Wow, Moscow, such a great place. I love how clean the trams are in Moscow."
That was pretty good.
Yeah, thanks.
I like that one.
So, but these new tariffs, while I do think they are pretty egregious, I mean, 50% is a lot. I probably wouldn't go that far, but, Trump always goes big or goes home, right? That's his whole thing. I think the reasoning for the tariffs is reasonable. I think driving a wedge between the relationship between India and Russia, who have been allies for a very long time, telling Modi, hey, we are going to fuck you economically if you continue to buy Russian oil, and putting Modi in a position where he might actually need to stop buying Russian oil, which is a huge, huge, huge blow to the Russian economy and to Putin specifically. I think that's a pretty good strategy. I think it's bold, but I don't think it's a wrong one. Because if it works, which it might, the U.S. has muscle power when it comes to, forcing deals through, for better and for worse. And I think in this case, it might be for better. Because Modi might look at the U.S.'s options and the plans of hitting this real nasty tariff on India and saying, you know what, fuck it, we're not messing with Russia right now then, if that's going to be the case. And if that ends up being the case, if there ends up being a split between Russia and India because of this, that is very good for the world, in my opinion. I think taking money away from Russia right now is in the interest of global peace, just because of what Russia's been doing in the last quite a number of years, 10 years now, 15 years now, and how dangerous Putin is right now. I don't know. I think this might work, and I think if it works, it would honestly be in the better interest of world peace, specifically when you look at taking away options from Russia, like financial options from Russia. Anyway, I wanted to start with that. Just give a little blurb on these new tariffs. I think a lot of people might be looking at this and thinking, oh, it's tariffs. How dare you, Trump? You're going to, ruin our economy or whatever. And yes, it still might negatively impact our economy. I'm not here to say that it won't. But right now it's just proposed, and the ball's in Modi's court to determine whether he wants to take this risk to his own economy or if he is going to start loosening his ties with Russia in terms of at least oil purchase. Jesse, you have any thoughts on this?
I think you pretty much hit the nail on the head with this. I'm really glad that you started with this and mentioned it, because I think it's something that's important to talk about. I know that, you hear the word tariffs and about half of our audience is like, but this is, important stuff. And also, again, it is really important to not just write off every single thing that Trump does as must be wholeheartedly evil. I do think most of it is. Personally, that's
evil
my opinion.
Or stupid, one of the two.
Evil or stupid, or designed to do something harmful to a certain sect of the population. Agreed. But there are plenty of things that he has done over the course of the last decade as president that were not especially controversial. There are things that he's done, dating back to the prison reform and whatnot, that I think were really good steps in the right direction. There have been decisions. Do I think in the grand scheme of things that changes his legacy as a terrible president and a wannabe dictator? No, I do not. But we have to get out of this mindset of, if the other side likes this, I inherently must dislike it. Because...
Or if they do something, it must inherently be bad.
Right. That's not a helpful mindset to have. And we talked about this last week on the podcast as well, with Alex, and what I hope you guys found to be a really fascinating discussion about information, misinformation. Don't just assume that the other side is inherently bad. Do your research. Go out there, figure out what actually is going on. And so, yeah, I think that trying to put pressure on India, one of the largest countries in the world, a country that obviously from a
Is
population
it still
perspective,
the most populous country in the
believe-
world, or has China overtaken it?
No, I think India is the most. I think China used to be, and I think India is now the most populous country in the world. Either way, it certainly is on pace to continue to be. To put some pressure on India to, again, use that as a means of pressuring Putin and Russia is not inherently a bad thing to do. Do I think it comes from a place of Trump caring about Ukraine? No. Trump feels betrayed by Putin. He feels like this was my guy, and I don't know what's wrong with him. Now he's lost his mind because he's being mean to me. He's not doing what I told him to do. No, they've had a split because Trump realized that Putin doesn't actually like him. This is... I don't think it's coming from some benevolent place.
Nothing ever is from Trump, but that doesn't make it a bad thing that he's doing.
Yeah, it could be very beneficial for us in the long term, and it could really hurt Russia, which we should all be rooting for, because the number of people that have died in this war in Ukraine is astounding. Not just in Ukraine, but also Russians, and the way that they treat their own people is absolutely horrific. For anyone that is unfamiliar, I mean, the way that they treat any sort of deserters, anyone who is, they're getting just put out there to slaughter. They don't care about their troops. They believe that their troops, the human lives, are disposable.
A lot of people think about Russia and like the mistreatment of Russians by the Russian government being like a USSR thing. When you think about Stalin and how like paranoid he was, that he like sent all his critics to gulags and whatever in Siberia. And I think a lot of people fail to realize that still happens.
Absolutely.
Like that, while we don't talk about it that much anymore because the USSR was dissolved and we're like, hey, brand new Russia, whatever, that still happens. And it might not be as...
Alexei Navalny.
Yes, exactly. That maybe it's not talked about as much now because there's not so much like a global villain like they may have been during the Cold War. It still happens, and it should still be mentioned. That sort of activity has never stopped to happen just because the USSR was dissolved and then reformed as a country, as Russia, right? And Modi, also not a great guy. No. Let's not forget that. Like, Modi's a terrible, terrible person. We won't get into it, but, like, no, and also not great.
This is where, we get into this kind of, like, this issue and with our population in general, and especially younger people. We're going to talk about younger people in a bit, but... concerns over and criticisms of Western society, as Western society is the villain in the eyes of many young people in our own country. And I just want to remind people that Russia is is essentially a dictatorship of sorts. It's a communist dictatorship. China is a dictatorship. India is under a very, very extreme government that's doing terrible things. I mean, China is damn near having a Holocaust. You want to be angry at Israel for what they're doing? Absolutely. Fully understand and agree. Also be mad at places like Iran. Be mad at places like Saudi Arabia. These places are, treating their citizens like they are inhuman, and they are not. These countries are not like some. It's not like the rest of the world is like some majorly oppressed place by the West. That has happened, of course, that has happened, and it does continue to happen in certain areas. But many of the other global world powers that are not Western are really, really run by horrible governments, and not governments that, they make the Trump government look good. That's how bad they are. And the Trump government may be the most dangerous thing to Western society and civilization that we have seen since World War II. So that's what we need to be understanding, is that, and I don't think people really get that. I don't think they gather how bad some of these places are.
Yeah, and I don't blame a lot of them because sure, we do have to focus internally. A lot of us don't have the privilege to focus on external forces that don't impact them as immediately as, their local government, as maybe Greg Abbott might, if you're living in Texas, which we'll get into in a minute here. But that doesn't mean that if you have the opportunity, you should absolutely, research that stuff and look into it, because it is not only frightening, but a lot of these dictators and wannabe dictators thrive off the knowledge that people outside of their country do not know about them and do not care about them.
Yeah.
And that allows them to continue what they're doing. Obviously, it's not like me or you can do anything by knowing the atrocities that happen across the globe, but by raising awareness to it, more and more people can raise awareness to it, and that's how we get global uprisings against stuff like what's happening in Gaza, against stuff like what's happening in Ukraine. It's like that's only because enough people talked about it. Because like we've talked about how it's really frustrating that like we had people on campuses, in the last years, like protesting Gaza, which had an immediate negative impact on our political system, even though they couldn't do anything about it. But one good thing about that is that because they were talking about it, it forced everyone's eyes to be on the situation there, which then in turn forced a lot of politicians' hands globally to at least address it to some degree, which has then led to, pressure on Netanyahu, etc. But
yeah, and just off of that as well, I want to say that the pressure campaign on the other side, trying to pressure Hamas, who are, contrary to what anyone might believe, these are not like Hamas is not a victim group here. Hamas are terrorists, and they're terrible people, and they're terrible.
The victims are the people of Gaza,
yes,
are the residents of Gaza.
People
Those
of Gaza,
are
Palestinian people who have to live under an assault from a foreign government as well as from their own government. And I will say that some of this pressure has led, this is a big deal. The Arab League came out last week and called for the Hamas to disarm in order to create a two-state solution. That's not endorsing Israel. That's saying Hamas cannot remain in power as governing Gaza going forward.
Right. Well, that's why it's so important when you look at the catchphrase. When you look at the catchphrase of "Free Palestine," which is what everyone says here, it's an important thing to say. Not because it doesn't, and "Free Palestine" as a phrase does not just mean Israel back off of Palestine, right? Which it does mean that, but that's only half of the motive. The other half being Hamas, get the fuck out of Palestine and free the people, free your own people. Israel, free, the Gaza Strip, like stop, obliterating people, stop causing genocide, but also free Palestine to Hamas, free the people, stop holding them captive.
Yes. Let them have a democratic election in which an armed force is not their government.
Right. Get the hell out. Both of you guys, get the hell out of here.
Yeah, and that's what we should, and that's why it's so perplexing to so many of us when we see protests involving what's going on in Gaza and there's people waving Hamas flags, which I think has toned down a little bit. I do think that some people have kind of realized, like, wait a minute, like, who am I cheering for here? But yeah, I mean, that's just so perplexing because, who has killed more Palestinians, than Hamas over the last, who has caused more deaths with their direct actions. So yes, interesting in that way. I did want to at least bring that up because the Arab League, I mean, that we're literally talking about, Arab states, like the other Muslim countries in the region saying Hamas cannot continue to control this area, which is a big deal. And good for them for doing that, first and foremost. I mean, I don't agree with many of their governments on many things, certainly not the treatment of women, but yeah, good for them for doing that. Anyway, back at home, we've got shit going down in Texas, right? Shit is going down in Texas. And Tyler, you want to kind of guide us through this situation here?
Sure. So we spoke a few weeks ago about the gerrymandering attempt in Texas, an attempt to redraw certain state lines outside of the normal appointed time in which you do this, which is after a 10-year census usually. And of course, California's response and other lawmakers' response to this attempt. So the attempt has moved forward to a vote, and now will be voted on by Texas House members to allow the redistricting. This vote will almost definitely be approved by the Republican majority. So when it came for the first day of the vote, which was 2 days ago now, some 50 or so Democratic lawmakers decided to just up and leave. They left the state, which keeps the vote open. Now, in order to vote on a measure, in Texas at least, you need what's called a quorum, minimum number of elected representatives to be present in the room so that a vote can even take place. Without these 50 or 51 Democrats in the Capitol, they do not have this quorum. They do not have that 3/4 minimum requirement, which means the vote can't happen. So by fleeing, they've effectively halted the vote from happening until they are returned. A bold move, I guess. Not sure what the strategy is there, but that's what took place. Now, the crazy thing is what happens next. Greg Abbott, who is, of course, furious at this moment, he calls for their arrest on the second day that they failed to arrive, which is a day ago. He calls for their arrest, calls for them to be arrested and forcibly returned to the Capitol where they can be forced to take this vote. That's insane. It's hard for me to believe that this is actually happening. Now, in addition to calling for their arrest, he has also filed a motion in the court to have them forcibly evicted from their seat, which he has no legal precedence for. So I don't think it's even going to be successful at all. It hasn't been so far, but, I wouldn't count my chickens with the Supreme Court, to be honest with you. But so far, unsuccessful. And thirdly is, perhaps most hilarious, is Donald Trump's response, who, of course, is also furious. Donald Trump himself has openly said that he wants to push this redistricting effort in an effort to explicitly get more seats for Republicans, 5 more seats in particular for Republicans. It used to be that gerrymandering was hush hush under the table. Now they don't care. Now he's just saying it out loud. But Trump has now said that he is open to considering sending the FBI to assist in the arrest, detainment of these Democratic lawmakers and forcibly return them to the Capitol in Texas. The FBI, man, that's just insane. I mean, it's absolute craziness. But Jesse, what are your thoughts on this?
In theory, if I am looking at this just as a citizen of this nation, and you take out the context and you say anything, and you take out the party, and you told me that 51 representatives have fled a state to deny that state the ability to basically govern in any capacity, I would sit there and I would have told you, wow, that sounds like some Republican shit. That sounds like something that they would do. And for that, I'm on board with this. Tentatively. I want to say that I also want to say I don't think this is going to work. Okay? I do think that in the grand scheme of things, this is going to be more performative than effective. It will delay this. But some of them are saying, we're willing to stay out of the state all the way through to the next, midterm. Because the thing is, Governor Abbott has issued this special session that goes through, I think, August the 17th or something. He said he's going to issue another 30-day special session immediately after that, if that one, if they don't get it. He's just going to keep doing this. Now, for every day they're gone, every single one of them is charged $500 a person. Now, representatives may make some money, but they don't make that kind of money. Let's be clear, okay? So, if you do the math, for 51 of them, which is what needs to be gone, 51 of them need to have left the state, that is $25,500 a day in fines that are being issued to all of them. Now, Beto O'Rourke and several other people are going out there raising money basically to pay these guys fines. I don't think...
Which Abbott is calling is a bribe, right?
Yeah, I don't know if that's legal. I really don't. I don't know the legality of this. This is the same thing, like Elon Musk gave out money, there's a lot of weird stuff relating to money and campaign finance that has been going on in the last few years, and I'm just not sure where we even have landed, like what is legal and what is ethical. But is it, if you look at it for a full year, 365 days, that would be $9,307,500. That's certainly doable. Like, some big name donors could throw together $9.3 million. Like, that's a lot of money to me. It's an insane amount of money to me. Some of these billionaires and whatever, all the way up to J.B. Pritzker, the governor of Illinois, like, those people have the money that they could do this. So I don't think the funds are going to be the reason why this fails. The reason why this is going to fail, in my opinion, is something is going to happen. There's like flood money that needs to be voted on. Something is going to need to be voted on urgently, and these people are going to have to come back and govern, because the heat on them for not governing is going to be so high. And things are going to start to, statewide, in a state as big as Texas, shit's going to start hitting the fan, basically. And at some point in time, they're going to have to come back. They can't hold out all the way for another year plus until the midterms. Like, I just don't see it happening. I applaud that they're doing this. I do think that this is the way the Democrats have to play. They have to be this way. And they have to be aggressive. And so, yeah, I say hold out as long as you fucking can on this and delay. Do whatever you can to stop this, because this is wrong. What they are doing, it's not like, this is kind of like a gray area. No, this is undermining democracy. This is actual fascist behavior that is taking place in Texas at the request of the President of the United States. So, I have no sympathy for Texas Republicans here. You guys have made your bed on this issue, but I don't think that it's going to work, sadly. I do think that Texas Republicans are going to eventually be able to pass this stupid law, and then it'll get challenged in court, and who knows, we talked, a couple weeks ago about whether the Supreme Court will allow that to fly or not. I also think that, California is going to push forward with this, if they do it, we do it, which is essentially what Gavin Newsom is proposing will be on the ballot for in your state this November, is a ballot initiative of whether, if Texas or other states change their districts mid-decade, are we able to do it and abolish the independent commission for this period? And I suspect most California Democrats are going to say yes to that. I do. I think, and I would vote yes, because that's the state of where we are right now. We are in a shit show. And the sad thing is, when you look at redistricting, if we really go into a war on redistricting, and what I mean by that is, Texas changes 5 states, so it's 5 districts. So California then changes 5 districts to make them more, Democrat leaning. Republicans are going to win that if that happens, because they have 23 states in which they have a trifecta. And trifecta means they have the state house, they have the state senate, and they have the governor's mansion. And when that's the case, they can do whatever the hell they want to do. They can pass laws and do whatever they want. So Democrats don't have nearly that many. And the states that do have that, just looking at New England, for example, there are no Republican representatives at all in New England, in the House. There are 0. We have kicked them all out. The voters have said, get the fuck out of here. In Maryland, my home state, Maryland has only 1. They have 7 Democrats in the House and 1 Republican, which of course covers my hometown. Of course, one Republican, Andy Harris, has been a thorn in my side for the past 20 plus years. It feels like he's a moron. And he's a United States House representative, and he loves Trump. But Andy Harris, they tried. The Democrats in Maryland tried to do something that would have made his district more difficult to defend, and that was shot down by a judge. So there are not very many options for Democrats to rewrite their districts and gerrymander and win. Doesn't matter that we have some of these big states. If you just look at the country, let's keep this in mind. Democrats lost 90% of counties in the United States last year. 90% of counties were lost by Democrats. I get that some of those counties are very small and that that's not indicative of the population. But from a governing perspective, that is very, very troubling. And that's very difficult to overcome. And so when you look at districts, yeah, Democrats should be able to turn the House in the next election, even if Texas decides to do this stupid 5-state bullshit, which they shouldn't be allowed to do without a fight. But I am concerned, admittedly, that I don't see Democrats being able to win this fight long term, sadly enough, because I just don't think that we have the grassroots power at the state level to be able to do this. In national elections, we should have an advantage because we have more people. We have so many people. But in these kind of statewide elections, there are way more Republican states than there are Democratic states.
I can only imagine that the strategy for Democrats here is that if they hold out the vote, that somehow the Republicans will say, okay, fine, we'll take out the gerrymandering, but can you at least come back to vote for the emergency relief for like the victims of the floods and all that stuff? And then they would come back and vote for that. But do you see that happening? Like, do you see any situation in which Republicans actually like back off on the redistricting thing?
No. That's their... And if they did, why would I believe them? I don't believe anything they say. I don't. I'm sorry. I don't. These Texas Republicans, if you're willing to do this, if you're willing to be so blatant about, like, we're going to take away the will of the voters, like, you want to take away 5 seats to the point where the entire state of Texas has, what, like 3 Democrats representing it when Democrats had 46% of the vote in the last election? Like, that's not indicative. That's not representative. That's not government. That's bullshit. So, no, I wouldn't trust them. If Greg Abbott came out and said, fine, we'll take this out of the bill, just come back and vote for this. No, you come back, all of a sudden we're in chains in the fucking House, we're voting. Like, that's what I would expect to happen, because that is how sick some of these people are. And I get this is reunited states, but we're talking about the worst of the worst who are pulling the levers on these things and fucking with democracy. And that's not something that we can compromise on. That is not something that I'm willing to compromise on democracy in general. Said it about January 6th, any of that stuff. And so, no, I don't see that ever being an option. I don't see the Republicans caving, and if they did, I wouldn't trust them. So I guess that's where I'm at on it.
So here's an interesting predicament that I think we find ourselves in when it comes to the future of the shape of democracy in America. Because we see actively right now our current system, our representative democracy system, we see that being manipulated by the parties for their own benefit with redistricting and all these other things. And we look at the people who are vocally opposing this. And I see a lot of talk right now about how we have to do away with representative democracy and go back to just a plurality vote, right? Just like every person's vote is a vote, and that's just it. Now, I have immediate reservations about this, as I assume you might too, because the whole reason we have a representative democracy is because having just like a straight vote, a one-for-one vote, would put way too much power in these big cities, which are, of course, mostly blue cities, right? California, Los Angeles, right? New York, whatever. And then the voice of, smaller states and, counties of 10,000 and under people would be completely lost because who would care about their votes, since their votes wouldn't do shit when put up against the millions of votes that would come out of these massive cities. But yet people are now calling for that, right? People are seeing the representative democracy system fail because it's being manipulated and it's being taken advantage of by people in power. And people are saying we need to do away with it completely. What is your thought on that argument? And what do we do about it? Because clearly there are clear problems with that argument, with like the idea of going back to just, or I say going back, we never really were, but like going to a position in which every vote was just a vote. And where we are right now, which is the representative democracy that we have created for this country, is now failing us. What do we do about this? Like, where do we land? Like how should we be approaching this argument that's kind of forming now?
Yeah, I think the interesting thing, and this may set some people off, this may be a controversial thing for me to say, but funny thing is, we broke away from a monarchy per se. We broke away from a constitutional monarchy because we didn't have representation in Parliament and a whole other variety of reasons, and because Sam Adams was a domestic terrorist, whatever. But it is funny how the parliamentary system that you see in the UK seems to function better. And I find that interesting. And I'm not saying that we can or should be revamping our entire system of government. That's not what I mean. But it is interesting that we created what was the first true democracy in the history of mankind, and really laid the groundwork for much of what Western society, other Western nations, have modeled themselves after our government. And now we're seeing the issues with some of it. And the historical reasoning as to why this is happening dives into slavery. It dives into a whole bunch of other reasons why our system of government is still flawed, and was never perfected. And slave states having significantly more representation than others, and trying to ensure via the Senate that northern states couldn't get rid of slavery. Like, all of that is still part of the government that we're dealing with and the system of government we have. In terms of representational democracy, I still think that works. I still think that should work. If you look at the parliamentary system, it works. I think the challenge is, if you look at it in the parliamentary system, like, those people choose who becomes the prime minister, who becomes the head of the country. The people who are elected then have to get together and choose who that person is. And I do think that tends to work better, because cooler heads do tend to prevail. Now, that hasn't stopped some really ridiculous prime ministers from taking charge in the UK. But, if you look at Liz Truss, who lasted, about as long as, a 13-year-old boy's ejaculation. Like,
oh, man.
Sorry.
Oh, man.
But Liz Truss did not last very long in that job. She did something that pissed them off, and her party ditched her to the side of the road. You can't tell. Boris Johnson, he's a crazy kind of Trump-like figure, whatever. He won an election, but a few years later, he was gone. He was ditched because the voters were turning away from him.
Right. Well, he was just riding the coattails of Brexit. Of
course he was. And the reality is that system has allowed them to kick out extremism. The Liberal Party, the Labour Party, went with Jeremy Corbyn. I've talked about this before. He is anti-Semitic. He just is. And that drove a lot of people away from the Labour Party. Yes, he was kind of this very liberal bastion, the kind of Bernie Sanders-esque style of the party. Went too far left, got wiped out. The party reinvented itself in a period of time. much more easily than we're able to reinvent ourselves because we're not at the wills of our voters, like the most extreme voters like that. And came back and won. Less than 5 years later, came back and won a big, huge election for the Labour Party to sweep back into power under a relatively kind of center-left government. That is a more easily functioning system of government than what we have right now. And unfortunately, our government is tailored to the extremes. In regards to representational democracy versus just one vote, whatever, I don't like the Electoral College, so I'm not in favor of that. But in general, I do think that you should have one person who is kind of accountable to a specific group of people. The problem is it should all be done by independent commission. The entire country's districts should be done once a decade by a federal independent commission that is nonpartisan. Totally nonpartisan, and it goes through a whole system. That should be what we should have, and I think the problem is the only people who want that are people who are already in competitive districts. Like, all of the people who are in safe districts do not want that at all. They don't want to vote because that means that they might be in a more competitive district the next time. So the people who are making the decisions about who gets the jobs are the people who have the jobs, which is a shitty system.
You said this a few weeks ago, but I guess we got to follow the Schwarzenegger method, right? You were saying that was the one thing that he did in California that actually made a lot of sense.
Yes.
And yeah, expanding that to a federal level seems like the only way that we can potentially maintain our current representative democracy and not have it kind of spiral into this manipulated, completely controlled system, right? That isn't representative of actual people and its actual constituents.
If the Democratic Party had any sense whatsoever, and if they could shut down some of these institutional people who are in these strictly blue districts, like, it's going to take an outsider. This is where I keep saying that the Democratic Party is going to need somebody like Donald Trump, like their version of Donald Trump, and not the hateful stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. But an outsider who comes in and basically reinvents their party. Because if somebody comes in and overhauls the Democratic Party running on a platform of term limits for everyone and no more gerrymandering, and they won, and then they forced the Democrats to follow that because that was the promise that they made with this candidate who is more popular than them. Like, that's the way that you get this done. Like, Donald Trump has convinced the Republicans to do a lot of things that are not remotely Republican or conservative. And he's done it because he is more popular than they are, and he is the face of the party. And that's what it's going to take for this to happen, because Republicans are never going to do that. But Democrats, I think, could make, if you had an outsider candidate who came in and made a really compelling argument and promised to run on term limits to get some of these people the fuck out of government so we don't have Chuck Grassley, so that, Senator Schumer can retire and move on to his second career as a cabaret singer singing New York, New York. Come on the pod, Chuck Schumer.
Come on, Chuck.
But, yeah, like, that's the only way that I see this changing, and, I don't know if that's going to ever happen, but maybe it will.
My concern with that is something that we actually saw recently with Mundami, actually, is that when you have people who are kind of outsiders that are, on the Democratic ticket because that's the ticket that they feel they have a best chance of winning under, because right now you kind of have to be one or the other. But you're an outsider who clearly has outsider thoughts that are not in line with maybe what the party standard is, say term limits, that the party will bury you. And there's very little that can be done unless you have like the greatest grassroots movement of like all time, which is going to be very, very, very difficult, especially right now. The party establishment is going to bury you. I think that's what we've been seeing with Bernie Sanders, with Mundami, with like all these kind of outsiders who are trying to kind of change the party. Now, whether or not that change that they specifically were talking about is good or bad, that's not really the argument here. But the fact is, outsiders coming in have a hard time when the establishment doesn't see eye to eye with you.
The difference is, though, that those candidates are, you're talking specifically about far left candidates, which is not a majority opinion. Like, regardless of whether you like it or not, like Bernie Sanders' policy positions, while some of them are very popular, many of them are not very popular in the grand scheme of things. Mamdani, a lot of his positions are going to be very, very unpopular, not just with people, on the right or even in the center. There's going to be people on the left who are going to be very upset with a lot of these policy positions if they're enacted. So,
right, and I'm not saying I agree with them either, but like I get the idea that, if the establishment doesn't like you, they will keep you from controlling the direction of the party.
Didn't stop Trump. Lindsey Graham was literally like, he is a race-baiting, sexist, homophobic bigot, and then like 6 months later was like, I love this man, I love him, he is just my savior, and he is doing the greatest job of any president I have ever seen, and God rest his soul. So that's what you need, is somebody that can go in there and be so popular and bully some of these people into finally realizing like they have no choice. Their political existence will be dictated on whether they fall in line with what the public wants. And term limits are very popular. Term limits are incredibly popular. We're all tired of seeing these 80-something-year-olds out there. Like, we're all done with that. But anyway, speaking of 80-something-year-olds, let's flip it to the other side of the generations, all right? So not the boomers, but the Gen Zs.
Oh, boy. Here it comes.
No. First of all, Gen Zs, I love y'all. I just want to say this. We're going to have a discussion here about some things that have been noted, and there's increasing evidence and increasing dialogue about Gen Z as a generation. I also just want to say that the generational thing, like, I don't buy into this idea of like, oh, I am entirely like, I fill every characteristic of a millennial. Don't like that. I don't like being put in boxes. This is just a thing that we have to talk about with changing generations and demographics and all of this. Like, there are changes that are taking place. And so I'm interested, Tyler, in your thoughts on this very specific subject. So there have been several different polls that have come out in recent months. And a new survey of 1,000 U.S. managers, and this is a legit survey, okay? 1,000 U.S. managers is revealing a growing frustration and with Gen Z workers. Nearly 9 out of 10 managers said that Gen Z workers need to be taught fundamental workplace behaviors. That means, 59% said they had to teach Gen Z how to receive a constructive criticism without becoming defensive. 46% how to speak appropriately with clients and colleagues. 45% how to multitask. 25% how to behave during meetings. Supervisors also report a relentless need for reminders around basic workplace conduct, including 48% mentioning Gen Z workers are not showing up on time, 47% about responding to messages promptly, 46% about meeting deadlines, 40% to put their phones away and communicate like professionals. There are other issues that are mentioned: making eye contact, cleaning up after themselves, dressing appropriately. The dressing appropriately one I can wholeheartedly say, in my experience, I have seen. This falls on top of a lot of other polls that have come out in recent years about workplace behavior, specifically with Gen Z. And I just want to say, like, I don't want to perpetuate this, like, oh, the older generation, we always dunk on the one that's coming behind us, because we got that. We were millennials, we got that. We were the participation trophy generation. We need affirmation, all of that stuff, whatever. Didn't like that. Some of it was fair. Some of it was very fair and continues to be impactful. But what we are seeing is the older generations are now looking at millennials much more favorably because Gen Zs coming up behind us are creating new challenges in the workplace. And I think that in my head, even sometimes I sit there and I'm like, they're kids, they'll grow out of it. They're not kids. The Gen Zs are about to no longer be children. We're at the very end of the Gen Zs coming in and becoming my students at the college level. Most of them are full-ass adults. And this is not acceptable behavior. I am sorry, and I have seen it personally. I have seen the way that they engage. And this is a generalization, because there are plenty of Gen Zs not behaving this way. But this is new. This is a new thing, and it comes from a place that I think is fair, which is an apathy relating to we don't have the opportunities to go anywhere because the doors have been shut on us. That is totally fair. It's fair to feel that way. But also, how are you guys going to exist? Like, how are you going to exist in society? And you are adults. This is not like, the 16-year-olds. You're full-ass grown adults behaving this way. The Gen Z, in April of 2024, a survey found that 70% of Gen Zers ask their parents for help in the job search process. That is significantly higher than any other generation prior to them. I understand, late bloomers, all of that. We're talking about some of them bring their parents with them to interviews. I've talked to people who have...
I have interviewed people with their parents next to them.
What is going on?
It was really awkward.
I have students, not just at this university, at others, who have had their parents reach out to me. They're a college student. Your parent, I am not, legally, I am not allowed to engage with a student's parent because that student is an adult. That is a Title IX thing. I'm not allowed to engage with their parents. So their parents email me. I have to send it off to somebody else and be like, hey, this parent emailed me about this, yada, yada. I'm not allowed to respond. So, like, that's crazy to me. This is clearly a problem. They're not developing at the same rate in general. And how do we address this? Is this just a me thing? I don't know, Tyler. I'm curious. You work in HR. You deal with all kinds of workplace stuff. I want to know your thoughts on this issue.
This is a fantastic discussion piece. And for one, the issues that you've identified in the poll and what you've seen specifically, I've seen that too. Now, obviously, the first thing I'll say is it's not all Gen Z. I have plenty of Gen Z employees that are fantastic, that they're great, that there's nothing wrong with them. I've hired really, really young, I say really young, like 18, obviously like 18, 19, like the youngest I could legally hire.
How young? Epstein.
No, not Epstein young. Stop it. And they've been great. And a lot of that is, and it's funny, like I've seen 19, 20-year-olds, Gen Zers that like below the competition, and by competition I mean like other, people around them, out of the water, right? Like in terms of their work ethic. And I've talked with them. Like I remember conversations I've had with these younger employees, and I've been like, hey, I just want to know like why are you so great? Like, what do you do? And I really want to know, like, I want to know what motivates you, because clearly it's something unique, because I don't see that in your peers. And what I learned is that, and this might not be a surprise to most people, is a lot of it's situational, right? A lot of it's like how you grew up, right? In this particular instance I'm thinking about actively, it was, a child of migrant to the U.S., who used to be undocumented, all these things, and they had a harder life coming up. And this person that my employee grew up with those challenges and with an older parent who had to go through all these challenges in coming to the U.S. and building a life. And so their work ethic is built on those experiences, right? The experiences of their parent kind of going through that process. And as a result, they have a much maturer mindset, right? They had to mature at an earlier age in order to, assist their family. And I think that is the big difference, I think, with, I say, a majority of Gen Z compared to a majority of millennials, compared to a majority of Gen Xers, because there's always going to be crappy eggs in every basket. But when you look at majority, when you look at polling and averages, the reality that I see is, and you touched upon this a little bit, but this is really the answer to it, is that children, and I guess now adults, right? Like each younger generation is maturing at a later age. The age of maturity and the age in which one becomes an adult, and I don't mean physically or biologically, I mean mentally and emotionally becomes an adult, has been increasing steadily with every generation. And there's a lot of factors as to why this is. The easiest one is quite literally people are getting older. People can survive for longer. I think that's kind of like the argument that you saw with mostly millennials is that, well, guess what? Like, people are living to be older. So they are a lot. So when the next generation comes out, they don't need to be a fully mature adult at like 15 years old. There's no need for them to start working in the coal mines at 12, because they might die at 40. We are seeing the life expectancy of people increase, right? They don't need to become adults as quickly because their parents have a more stable life and they're living older. We also have a lot of social changes happening. And I know that both of us have huge gripes with this, but you look at AI, right? And you look at the opportunities that people, specifically children, have that does not require them to form social connections. We have so many options on our computers that we can effectively stay here 24/7 and never need to make a human connection because we can do everything from our computers and our phones, whether it's using technology, AI, or whatever else. We don't need to make these connections like maybe me or you did, and millennials did, because when we were younger, because the internet was infantile when we were that age, or non-existent for the older millennials, and of course didn't exist for previous generations. Gen Zers uniquely have so much more technology that gives them the opportunity to not have to mature at the age that we expect them to mature, right? So then we have these like internet terms that are coming out now to reflect these kind of people that are kind of these stay-at-home bodies that just kind of just sit in their own like spaces and never move. We have like these like neckbeards or whatever, like trolls and stuff like that, gooners or whatever you want to call them. These people just kind of just like fawn over the internet women and just stay at home and they don't touch grass. All these things, right? All these dumb, silly terms that people are coming out with now that you see on like the internet. But as silly and funny as they are indicative of a problem. I would consider a problem, at least, in that this technology is stifling the ability for Gen Zers to mature. And I think that's why we are getting all of this data now of them. Now they're forced to have a job, forced to go out in the real world, all of a sudden don't have the skills to actually do the job the way that older generations expect them to have. And I think that's also a thing. There's an expectation that you have to perform a job a certain way. And there's problems with that. I'm not going to lie that there's problems with that. Like maybe like I've taught this, I've done trainings on like generational differences and how a big part of the frustrations that older generations have, like Gen Xers and even boomers that are still in the workforce have, when they're like, man, these people, I can't deal with them. A lot of people start complaining about this stuff. The first thing I say, before I go into kind of like the more agreement piece, is that like, well, we do have to change. Like, these things change with every generation. The way we address certain things changes with every generation. There is some level of flexibility that management has to have because generations are different. When you talk about like the eye contact thing, I think that's actually a really good example, is that we see a lot of behavioral differences with Gen Z in terms of how they communicate. And I think that while I think a lot of people might see that as a problem inherently, I think it's less of a problem when you think about the fact that a lot of people might not feel comfortable with eye contact, but can still communicate, right? Fine, they can still produce the same information that we expect them to produce, but they might just be uncomfortable being in person, or they might just be uncomfortable giving eye contact or shaking your hand or whatever. Those are the types of changes where I'm kind of like, okay, they're still giving you the information you need. They're still doing their job. They're just not doing their job the way you remember it to be like standard, right? Like shaking your hand, making eye contact, standing up straight, dressing in a suit and tie. Those are the types of changes where I say, okay, maybe we need to be flexible and maybe not be as like, well, this is the way I did it, so so that you have to do it that way too. But everything in mediation, right? There are some things where when you talk about decorum, right, and you talk about like the way information is presented, and you talk about multitasking and things like that. Yes, those things are an issue, and that can be a result of like just like the stifled growth that the Z generation has had because of these factors that I mentioned previously. But I think there's a lot of give and take that needs to happen, at least in the workforce. Maybe a part of that is kind of meeting in the middle of picking and choosing our battles of what we should be aiming to change in their behaviors and what we can probably just kind of let go, and I think there's going to be some give and take that we have to have when we're looking at these generations. I do think, and not to toot the millennial horn or anything, I do think that like the behavioral like ebb and flow of the way it's changed is very much like you can kind of see it. It's happened in the past already. I don't think it's anything surprising that we have this like ebb and flow of like just behavioral changes, where the generation that comes after ours just wants to do either an extreme version of what we've been doing or push back and go completely the opposite direction. We've seen that in many different ways with Gen Z. We talked politically a few weeks ago about how, Gen Z men are pulling conservative in a way we did not anticipate, which is, an example of how they've just pushed away from millennials, right? But then you look at their behavior in the workforce, and I feel like that's not so much pushing away from millennials, but more making what we started doing more extreme. Because if you look at when we started in the workforce, we were pretty radical compared to like baby boomers in the workforce, or even Gen X's in the workforce, wanting to be acknowledged for every little thing that we did. That pushed their buttons, and they were like, what the hell? While we look at that, because it's our generation, we look at that as, come on, it's not a big deal, dude. We just want to be recognized for what we did. To them, that was a radical idea. What Gen Z is doing is a more extreme version of that, like kind of shift from the hyper rigidity of like the baby boomer work philosophy. Hopefully what I see is kind of like a return to normalcy once it kind of gets past this like extreme pull. I don't know if that's going to happen. Nobody does. But I think when you look historically, it's an ebb and flow, right? It's like every generation wants to do more extreme, until finally there'll be a generation that says, fuck you, we're going to go back to this way of doing things. And it's going to go back, and it's just going to it's going to be a cycle. That's at least, those are my thoughts on it.
I hope that's true. You make a lot of really interesting points here. I want to bring up the one thing that I think you didn't mention, which is also COVID. COVID had a significant impact on this. And one thing that these studies do find is, contrary to what like some old angry people might have you believe, and I know you all think I'm one of these old angry people, but I'm not. But Gen Z is being viewed not as unwilling to do work, but unprepared. And that's not really their fault generally. Like, yes, there are some things where it's like don't wear a freaking t-shirt to an interview. Just why are you doing that? Why would you ever think that's okay?
Well, that's an interesting argument, right? Because we think so. We're like, yes, you have to like dress for the part, but but what does dress have to do with your skills? You know, I agree with you. I don't think we should be wearing t-shirts to interviews. As an interviewer myself, as a recruiter, I agree that people should dress to impress. I am not on the side of wear t-shirts.
No.
But it is a thing to think about. Like, does dress really have anything to do with your skills?
No, but hold on. So there are companies that have like taken away dress codes like that, and there's many companies that have done that. Put yourself in the position of power and then do it. Don't just expect the world to adapt to you and just say, I'm just going to do this, and I don't believe in this, like, expectation. I don't believe I should have to do this. I mean, like, this is the thing I hear from some people, like, I don't believe in interviewing. Like, okay, you may make a good point about how, like, interviews don't always reflect the work that you can do, and they tend to favor people that, you know, are able to bullshit better or whatever, or, like, you know, maybe don't have the same skill set. That's a fair thing to say, but you still have to interview. Like, get into the position of power and then change it, because the world is not just going to adapt to you. That's like, and that's, I think, what COVID did to a lot of people, was they got accustomed to the world adapting to their own, whether it was, you know, social anxieties, whatever it was, the world adapted to them for a period of time, and I think they've really struggled when the world went back to some semblance of what it was before, being like, wait a minute, now I have to, like, make myself uncomfortable, like, I have social anxiety, I have to go and do an interview, and that's an issue. Like, at some point you do have to acknowledge that there are general standards of the people that you're interviewing with, that you might offend somebody if you go into an interview just wearing a t-shirt. And if you actually care about the job, if you care about the position, if you care about wanting to make a life, you do have to make those decisions, right? Like, you do have to sometimes, like play the game by the rules that are currently set to be able to change the rules later, right?
I agree with that. And I think that I still think that, like, if they want to push the envelope and ask the questions, that's okay. Like, they could ask the questions. Like,
yeah.
The expectation that the world doesn't revolve around them, yeah, that's a little ridiculous. But I think that there isn't inherently a problem with being like, hey, can I wear a t-shirt to an interview and see what happens? Or just decide to wear a t-shirt and see what happens. Are you gonna get the job? Probably not. But that's gonna be a teachable thing. You know, it's like, you're gonna find out that you are gonna have to wear a suit and tie, or at least just a dress shirt, to an interview.
But this all comes back to, they never got those experiences. You know, like, they never got, because of COVID, many of these young workers weren't given the chance to learn through experience or observation. So now they are adults. Again, they are coming to maturity later, as you said.
I mean, everyone interviews once, the first time, right? Everyone interviews for the first time. I only knew to wear a dress shirt to an interview because I was told by my parents to do that.
Yes.
I didn't learn it. You know, I was told. So I imagine that, I would hope that they would be told as well, right?
I mean, I say that, look, I teach interviews. It's one of the big things that I do as an acting instructor, and people say, well, what, acting, interviews? No, like, you are acting.
Interview is acting,
right,
yeah.
When you are in an interview, you are presenting the best part of yourself, and it's kind of my specialty. It's one of the things that I am known for as an acting instructor, is that I make my students do an interview as themselves, for a mock job interview. And the behaviors that I see coming in, like the unpreparedness, whatever, we talk through them. But a lot of them, you're right, they have never heard of before. They've never heard, you know, various things. They don't know how to answer various questions, and that's fine. That is totally okay. But, yeah, in general, they're at some point they are going to have to give a little bit on their end as well about like where the world is, and it comes back to this idealism of like, well, the world should be like this, and I applaud young people have always been idealistic. We always have been, but young people always see the world as it should be, and sometimes overlook the way that it actually is, and the fact that you can't change the world and how it is just by like refusing to play the game. This is Democrats do the same. That we talk about this all the time. You know, they're so upset about the system that they just sit it out. I hear this from a lot of people, you know, that end up voting for Jill Stein or whoever the hell they vote for. They're so angry about the system that they won't play the game. Well, when you don't play the game, you lose the game. And if Gen Zs don't realize as a generation very quickly that like they are going to have to be functioning members of society, like they are going to have to be self-sufficient, they're going to have to figure out how to fit in with the way the world is. They can change it as they grow into it, but you can't just expect the world to change to you. And I think that's the big conflict that has existed. This goes back to millennials, Gen Xers, like even baby boomers. Look at what the baby boomers fucking did in the 1960s, you know, with the flower power, the hippie movements, all of that stuff. Like this is not new, but the technology makes it different because one, it's happening later, and two, because it is more difficult to teach them this. Like they're not just learning it from, well, I guess I'm on my own. They right now, what we have not seen yet is them being able to adapt, to change and adapt in society. We have not seen that growth, and hopefully companies are going to realize, okay, maybe we do need to take our Gen Z employees, maybe all of our employees, and do some like workplace 101. Like maybe that's something that we actually have to teach, to make sure that we're giving them the tools, because they may not have gotten them due to COVID. They may not have gotten them just for a variety of reasons. Workplace 101, what does that mean? And, you know, there's a lot of us in higher ed that are starting to do that in our, you know, whether it's in athletics, whether it's in theater, whether it's in any sort of extracurricular or just in the classroom. We're realizing we don't just have to give them the information they need. We have to also give them, like, how are you adults? How do you be adults? And that used to be high school, but I don't think it is anymore.
I agree with you. That's really great points. And I'll say one thing really quick is, at what point, and maybe this is controversial, maybe this is going to spark a lot of hate, I don't know, but at what point are we going to look at this issue, this concern that we have over the change in Gen Z behavior in the workforce and society, and instead of looking at Gen Zs and being like, well, what the hell is wrong with you, look at Gen X parents and say, what the hell are you doing? What have you been doing?
Oh, I'm already there. And that's not just Gen X parents, that's boomer parents, that's millennial parents.
You look at COVID and it's like, yeah, COVID did a number on them, but like, they're not alone in the world. It's not like they're birthed and they're just like left in society to fend for themselves, and that every deficiency you look at is their fault or the fault of society's impact on them. No, I'm gonna as a parent, I'm gonna look at how they're raised, because not only because I'm a parent myself, but because I have seen examples of great, fantastic Gen Z employees, better than probably I am as an employee, and asking them how did you learn to be so goddamn responsible? And they say, how I was raised.
It's almost always the parenting. You're absolutely right. Like, yeah.
But like at the end of the day, like I think there is a lot of concern that we have to levy against the way they were raised. And we've talked about this before, both privately and on the pod. But I think that it was such a I don't want to use the word mistake, but it was kind of a mistake, man, when we went through this entire like era of telling kids that they can get any degree they want to get, that they can do whatever they want to do and be whatever they want to be. You could be a fucking astronaut, a rock star, you know, you could whatever. You could be the next Britney Spears. You could, get a degree in whatever the hell, still life art or something, that's just, and it's gonna, it's gonna make you happy, and you're gonna get a job, and you're gonna do what you love. Man, that was a mistake, dude. That was a mistake. And yeah, that's hindsight. I don't care. It's hindsight. Sure, it was. But that was a mistake.
And that was largely boomer parents. Like that was largely boomer parents that started that. But it went into Gen X. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That was a huge mistake, and we've talked about that on the pod before. That created an unsustainable expectation. And for so many of us as millennials, that was a challenge coming into adulthood and having to realize this was kind of a lie. Like, it wasn't an intentional lie, it wasn't a malicious lie, but it wasn't true. And as such...
Well, I think that's why we're so concerned about... That's why we're talking about this right now, right? That's why we're so up in arms about Gen Z's behavior, is because we already lived through the mistakes of being raised that way, raised on the you could do anything parentology. And we're like, no, stop now, please stop, or else it's gonna be so much worse for you. And it is, because of the way the economy is right now, and because of the way society is. They are making the same mistakes, except it's affecting them worse. And
see, I think Gen Zs are actually more conscious of the reality. Because we didn't get everything that was promised to us, per se, as millennials, I think Gen Zs saw that. They saw their older siblings, or they saw, their friends, or they see their teachers, or whatever, and they have heard from enough, in social media about this, about kind of the struggles that millennials had. They grew up hearing from millennials that were struggling and seeing young people struggle in a way that had not been the case previously, and not to say that other generations didn't struggle. Again, I just want to clarify this. Like, these are generalizations. It's a different struggle. Yes, but they saw that, and so they were like, then why would I put any effort into this? Why am I going to care about a workplace? Why am I going to put in all of this if the reward is not going to be there for me? And I don't blame them for that. I don't think that that's a wrong sort of mentality. I just think that if I was advising my kids, I would be like, if you do that, you are condemning yourself to live that. Like, part of the thing is, like, for millennials, part of the reason that we're starting to really break out is, one, because we're finally getting the opportunities as boomers are retiring, but also because we were persistent. Like, we had, for so many of us, we had these dreams of, like, this is what we want, this is what I want, and I have to find a way to make this happen. And yeah, does that mean that we all achieved exactly what we wanted? No. But we have found a way to get some version of something that works for us. A lot of us have, not everyone. And it was because of persistence. It really, to me, that's what I see in people our age. It's the ones who really just didn't take no for an answer for long enough, like kept trying to plug away, that have started to find success and stable lives in this economy. Will we be working until we're 80? Yeah, a lot of us will. Like, will we be working way too long? Will we see Social Security? No. Like all of those things were lies that were given to us. But we are, you can't take away that sense of aspiration entirely. Like, that was part of who we were. And so for the Gen Zs, I don't know. They didn't grow up with that same sense of optimism. We talked about the Obama optimism recently. Like, they don't remember a period in which there was a belief that the country could get better. They have only seen the country get worse. And so that's troubling. And again, this is not a dunk on Gen Z thing. Like, this is just a reality of the situation. Employers are looking at Gen Z and saying, what the fuck do I do with them? I feel like I'm babysitting them. And that's different. That's a new thing that we're going to have to figure out, and Gen Zs are also going to have to figure out themselves.
Agreed. And if I want to address our Gen Z audience directly right now, uh, through my own experiences and what the future might hold for you in the workplace and why might be a bigger concern than you might think. This is not two millennial guys dunking on you and like talking about how trash next generation is. That's not true. You're not trash.
You're not trash.
I know
Not even
so
close.
many. I mean, all my siblings are Gen Z except for my one older sibling. So like, duh. Like they're great and they're smart. Many of them, like I know many Gen Zs smarter than I am. But here's the reality when it comes to the workplace. As someone who lives, eats, and breathes, the corporate language and all that nonsense, and has had to make difficult decisions that are unfortunately based on age and generational differences. Jesse, you mentioned earlier about how, like, if we want to make the changes, well, then get into management and make those changes there. That option for them, that opportunity for them is dwindling.
Yes.
Is dwindling, and if this concept that like the Gen Zers as a generation are just irresponsible, or they don't have the proper decorum or time management skills or whatever other things that were mentioned earlier, like if that idea persists, you as a Gen Zer are not going to get the opportunity to be in a managerial position. And millennials are on track to be working until an age probably later than any generation prior. We are not leaving at 65. You don't have another 20 years of us. You have another 40, 50 maybe years of millennials in power.
Good Lord, if I live that long.
Yeah, right. Of millennials in managerial roles. They will not put you in those roles because of the way society thinks about Gen Z decorum and like the Gen Z managerial attitude, right? If you want that to change, then frankly, you older, Gen Zers that are in the workforce have to change that yourself. You have to start showing that you can be in those positions, because right now people, especially older like CEOs and people in power, are actively choosing millennials and older individuals for managerial roles over people who are younger because of that fear of the concept and the stereotype that Gen Zers are just not fit for the corporate office environment and can't manage correctly and can't do the work. I don't think that is true. It's a stereotype. It is just a generalization. But it is a generalization that is directly impacting an entire generation's opportunity to rise up the corporate ladder in corporate America, in white-collar corporate America. That is a problem. That is a sincere problem because, one, obviously there's like legal issues with that. There's age discrimination happening in that. And I would love to tell you, oh, well, it's age discrimination, so, they can't do that, so you're fine. Not true. Not true. It can happen, and they do it. I've seen it happen a million times. It's a very easy thing to defend. It is not something that, you're going to be able to, like, fight your way in court. I'm sorry. That's the truth of it. I'm telling you, what you can do is prove them wrong. What you can do is prove that you are not the stereotype and that your generation is not defined by those generalizations. That's what you need to do. Not even what you can do. That's what you need to do. Like, this is me being like as transparent and as honest and as direct as I possibly can be. That is what you need to do. Because right now, actively, those roles are being filled, the managerial roles are being filled by millennials, older millennials, because that's where people who are in executive positions have faith and have trust in, because they know how they're going to work. They know the work ethic, because millennials have been around in the corporate world already for like 20 years. So like they know how we behave. They know how what we're like, and they trust that, and they want to lean on that, and they're not going to lean on the crazy radical change that is the Gen Z work ethic. Not because it's bad. I don't think it's bad. But it's different, and people don't like different. People don't like different. So if there's a call to action that I have, it's that you have to really prove for your generation, prove that you can fill those roles, because if you don't, you're going to be stuck not in those positions, and you're not going to have the opportunity to make the changes you want to change, because you're not going to be given the opportunity to make those changes. The only people I know, and I've worked for a lot of CEOs, and the only ones that I know that have actively been okay with hiring like Gen Z people into leadership positions are really young CEOs. Are people who can actually like think outside the box, who are like under 40 or under 50, under 40 CEOs, which is a rarity. Let me just say that. That's a very rare thing to get CEO under 50 or hell even under 40. But those are the only people that are even going to give you a shot. Don't wait for that shot. Don't rely on that. That's an outlier situation. And I've seen it, but it's very much outlier. And even then, those younger CEOs are kind of hesitant to do it. They'll do it because they're like, hey, you know what, I'll give them a shot. And they're willing to make that risk, but it's very rare. And even then, it's not 100% of the time. Usually, for positions that are very critical, they would never make that risk because, you know, why would they, right? It's their company. So that's the call to action that I have for you guys. You have to prove them wrong because, again, we are going to be we as in millennials, are going to be working for a lot longer than you expect because of the economy. Gen Xers are still in the workforce, and they're going to probably also still be working for a very, very long time.
Yeah.
They might be working until 80, which is insane to think about, but it's true. They might literally be working until 80, even beyond. We might just be full of Chuck Schumers in corporate America. That's insane.
Yeah, the difference being that like we're going to be holding on not because we want to, but because we can't afford to retire. And so you make so many great points here, and just to put a button on it, like it is a dog-eat-dog world already, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. It is a world of haves and have-nots, and no one is sitting here telling you to compromise all of your values and beliefs or to totally sell your soul. Again, Tyler and I worked these kind of really shitty jobs. That's how we met. We literally met at a shitty job with bad hours and doing really, really unpleasant work in our early 20s. Early to mid 20s for me. And, you know, that sucked. It wasn't pleasant. It has led to some doors opening for both of us going forward. We can't promise that there's going to be fewer doors for Gen Zs than there were for millennials, and there were way fewer doors for millennials than there were for Gen Xers, and vice versa. Like, the doors are slowly closing, and they're not opening nearly as much. And so you still have a life ahead of you. I realize that as a young person, it's easy to just be like, fuck this, I'm just going to wait and I'll figure it out. You know, right now everything sucks and the world sucks and I'm going to wait until the world decides to change. Like, right, and you have the opportunity to stay at home for a longer period of time because of the way the family dynamic has changed. I get that it's tempting to stay at home, in the basement or whatever. You know, I know it's a stereotype, but like, literally just people staying at home until they're like 25, 28 years old. You can do that, doesn't mean you should. And even if that's what you have to do, if that is the situation, if you're staying at home, you better be using that to your advantage. You are not paying rent, use that to your freaking advantage. Go out there and push and work hard and try and get into a job, and don't jump jobs every 6 months. Wait at least a little bit, because that killed millennials, a lot of us. It killed us, myself included, for jumping jobs too quickly because I was working terrible jobs. I was like, fuck this, whatever. That lack of longevity makes you a much less appealing candidate. And as such, yes, if you can show some level of longevity, if you can show some level of social currency, the ability to speak to someone face to face, I'm telling you, it's going to be a big deal going forward. That's going to be a huge, huge asset for you if you're trying to exist as just a human being. I know that we usually talk about politics. This is kind of politics adjacent, but it's important, and I hope that, I know that there are young people that listen to this podcast. I know that that there are young people who need to hear this. So hopefully you've listened this long. You've stuck with us here on the podcast today as we've had this discussion. But again, we are not trying to dunk on you. Genuinely, I don't, the things that we're talking about here, I think, are more societal than any sort of personal thing. That, this is...
and the consequences of generalization and stereotyping. And I think that's it affected us as millennials, but it's affecting you a lot more than it affected us. And that's kind of like, it's like, is recognizing right now. Where it's like we experienced a part of what you're going to experience, but you're going to experience it a lot worse.
Yeah.
And we're warning you.
Be warned. With that, we've had a nice long discussion here this week. Tyler and I are off to New Orleans this tomorrow. Can't wait for that. Looking forward to it. So we'll be back from New Orleans next week, hopefully with a guest on the program. We've got a tentatively lined up a very nice guest to speak with and provide some insights next week. Until then, continue to be active and trying to engage with people across political divides, and of course, treat everyone with respect right now. We need it more than we can explain. The world needs more respect, and per last week's discussion, if you are sharing something, make sure it is true. Please don't spread misinformation willingly or unwillingly. I have found myself already going in and being like, okay, what am I sharing? I'm going and I'm searching. Like, that discussion really, really helped me. So if you haven't listened to that one, recommend you go back and listen to our conversation with Alex Johnson last week.
I quite literally, I think 3 or 4 days ago, I almost shared a false tweet or whatever, X post from Dmitry Medvedev.
Yeah.
Saying something. He's been saying a lot of stuff about Trump, but there was something that somebody shared that he was talking about, like having access to incriminating information about Trump, and it looked real juicy,
Mm-hmm.
And I quite literally almost shared it, and I was like, well, let me find the tweet and actually be able to screenshot it myself, and I couldn't find it.
Yep.
I looked for an hour, I think. I was scrolling through his X account, and I couldn't find it. And I was like, oh my God, was that misinformation?
Isn't that crazy? It is that easy,
Yeah.
Even if you are actively, it does not matter level of intelligence. Spreading information happens to all of us, regardless of intellect, if we are not careful and cautious, if we're not doing the research that we need to do. So, with that, thank you all so much for listening. Follow us on Instagram @ReUnitedStatesPod. From Manchester, New Hampshire, I'm Jesse Saywell.
And from Los Angeles, California, my name is Tyler Eric.
And this has been Reunited States.
Quasimodo. When the whole world has got you down, and there's no one else around, turn that crown right upside